Thanks for staying with me on this. And I realise it's set from what he's just said that I'm holding you from the bar, so I won't take more time than I have, which I can see is running down. Right. So I was asked to talk about what's going on in the rest of Europe, and there's stuff happening all the time. One thing you will see from this that it's not coordinated. So lessons from fire do not travel across borders. Yes, everybody's aware all around the world about what happened in London in June last year at Grenfell Tower, but most of the time they're going out of their way to say it couldn't happen here. There's not actually much going on in the way of change elsewhere. But there are other things happening for other reasons. So these are the things I'm going to cover, and I was asked to put a question at the end, so I have one. So first up, recent positive code changes. So this is quite complicated, and actually I've even simplified it, but Belgium has a new code, if you like, for enclosed car parks. And it's not perfect, it's not exactly what we would have wanted, but the upshot is that more and more underground car parks, new ones in Belgium, are now being fitted with sprinklers. This is not actually yet black and white in the law, but it's being applied by the fire brigades in Belgium, and in Belgium they are the AHJ, not the same as here. Then, what have I got? Oh, yes, believe it or not, this is a simplification, as I said. Finland, this applied from January this year, a new building code, and it's put some limits on the maximum size of uncompartmented areas that you can have, and this applies to places of assembly, schools, shopping centres, and then also sprinklers are required in single-storey factories and warehouses, 2,000 square metres if you don't have structural fire resistance, but I'm told in Finland they often do, in which case the limit is 4,000 square metres. We'd be delighted if we got to that point here in the UK. It's an ambition that many of us have. We're not there yet. And then also, perhaps we can learn from countries that use wood. So they've obviously been working with wood in construction much longer than we have, and they now allow you to build 3 to 8 stories, timber frame buildings or out of wood, hotels and healthcare buildings, only if they're fitted with sprinklers. For some years they've already allowed this with residential buildings and offices, so this just adds to the list. France, since the beginning of January, sprinklers are required in enclosed car parks. That basically means underground usually, above a certain area, 3,000 or more than 2 underground levels. And if they are fitted in enclosed car parks, you get some relaxations in other measures. So you don't need fire detection. You can reduce the capacity of the smoke ventilation system, and also reduce structural fire protection. And if there's no building above it, you can reduce the structural fire protection quite a bit. So that's what's happened just recently. I haven't gone back over decades. This is just in the last few months. Looking ahead, what might we get? Well, something in Belgium again, believe it or not, or at least Flanders. The Flemish government funded some fire tests on care homes a couple of years ago, and is now holding a series of workshops to talk about the results of those tests. And the Flemish official who's in charge of all of this is coming to the conference that I'm organising in Stockholm next month, and I hope that bringing her along to that will put her under pressure to have something to say. Who knows? We expect there will be some changes in the regulations, and that there will be an increase in the requirements for sprinklers. France again, and if I'd done this a couple of years ago, I'd have had nothing to say about France or Belgium, so it's just a coincidence. But the government has a piece of legislation that's out there at the moment, very long document, and Article 26 of it would, in effect, open up France to fire engineering. So fire engineering it exists in France, but it's largely an academic exercise. There's really not many people doing it. And the fire brigade is also the AHJ in France, and they're not really very open to this. There is a lot of lobbying against this idea from vested interests in the status quo, but we are hopeful, because this is piece of legislation not by some backbench MP, it's from the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister takes his instructions from the President. So we're hopeful that this will go ahead. Why this is positive for us is that in France, the building codes rarely mention sprinklers. So if someone's going to take a different approach to how they design fire safety in buildings by using fire engineering, there is a chance that the fire brigade, they will use sprinklers. We've been educating fire officers in France now since 2010. Twice a year we organise a 2-day course on sprinklers at the French Fire Brigade training headquarters in Paris. And the attitude to sprinklers amongst fire officers in France has changed from being negative to now positive. So these government bills are with the Assemblée Nationale and the Sénat at the moment. Who knows? Maybe later this year. Ireland. I, as an ignorant Brit, thought that Ireland would never take any notice of the UK. But actually, if you look at the Irish equivalent of approved document B, it's very, very similar to the one in this country. A year or so ago, they revised their guidance for houses, modest gains for sprinklers. For several years now, they've been working on the other one, which is for most other types of buildings. So we have in this country Volume 1 and Volume 2, and so do they, but they're swapped round. So where ours is, no, I'll try not to get this wrong. Volume 1 is for houses, theirs it's Volume 2. But otherwise, it's very similar. For several years, officials have been telling me that they are minded to require sprinklers in care homes, in flats above 3 stories, in timber frame flats above 2 stories, and in warehouses over 1,000 square metres. They've been saying this for several years. It hasn't happened. And since Grenfell, it's all gone quiet. I think they're watching to see what we do here. Poland. The fire code is under review in Poland at the moment. And at the moment in Poland, you can go up to 10,000 square meters in unsprinkled compartment. And we are hoping to see a change there. We've been making the case for this with officials who are sympathetic. Of course, there's a political dimension to this. Any time you introduce such a change, somebody is going to have to pay for sprinklers who's not used to doing it, and they will complain. But at least we have the officials on our side, which I cannot say is the case in this country. So who knows? UK, well, actually not the UK, Scotland. This has been mentioned already. There is a proposal to require sprinklers in all new social housing and perhaps in existing social housing. The period for the public comment ended on the 16th of April. The Scottish Government has a month to respond to that. So sometime later this month, in fact very soon, we're hopeful that we will hear more about this. So it hasn't gone away. We think this is going to be picked up. We believe it has wide political support. In fact, we know it does, because that's been demonstrated at an event in the Scottish Parliament. This is Scotland's response to Grenfell. England's response, I'm waiting for it. And it'd be interesting when we get to the 14th of June if nothing's changed. I can imagine whoever's the minister that day of the week being grilled on the Today programme and asked by John Humphreys what's changed and having to admit nothing has changed. So, standards, very dry topic, but we do need to have standards, because if a code official is going to say put sprinklers in a building, they're going to want to know, well, what's a sprinkler and what's a sprinkler system? They need to have something to refer to. Now, I know most people here are looking at the UK, and the UK has standards for that, which were developed for those reasons. So the UK has a standard, and so does the Netherlands, so do the Nordic countries, but the rest of Europe doesn't. If you produce a European standard, in one go you have a national standard for 34 countries. It's also automatically translated into French and German, so they have something in their language they can use. So we've been working on this now for longer than I thought. I chair the little group that's been doing this. The standard is called EN 16925, and believe it or not, it's coming to you shortly. We finished our work. When you draft a European standard, it goes to all the national standards bodies, so BSI in this country, AFNOR in France, DIN in Germany, and so on. And then the idea is you have a mirror committee, and they can make comments. We got so many comments the first time, we did this process twice, so we've done it twice now. Altogether, combining both efforts, that was 1,000 comments. And now we have a final version that is just a yes-no, up-down vote. And it should be coming out for that vote, I think, later this month. And I think you then get 2 months to say yes or no, and I encourage you to vote yes. It's a good document. There's been a lot of input from the UK. To complement that, there is a standard for residential sprinklers. What is a residential sprinkler? Now, these products are not new. They've been on the market for decades, and we don't want people reinventing the wheel. So, in effect, this standard, although it's a European standard, the fire test protocol is the UL 1626 fire test protocol. Because if you change the fire test protocol, people probably have to change the product to pass it. There's no sense to that. A fire doesn't know which country it's in. So that's why we've produced those standards, so that regulators have something they can refer to, and to support the acceptance of residential sprinklers. There's a lot going on with residential sprinklers in this country. Until recently, the leading country for installation of residential sprinklers was Norway. There are only 5 million people in Norway, as against 65 million in this country. We've now caught up. We should have caught up a long time ago. But in proportion to the population, Norway still far outstrips us, and Sweden also does. So we can still grow a long way. So as I say, they want national standards. That's why the British standards were produced. And I talked about the Nordic countries and the Dutch one. And the German insurers, VDS, produced their own code of practice. These are all different, these documents. And they were all more onerous than NFPA. And frankly, our experience of residential sprinklers, how successful they are at saving lives, is based on statistics from NFPA. And if they're good enough to work there in construction that is by and large more vulnerable than ours, they tend to build with wood where we do less so, I don't see why we should be doubling the amount of water and doubling the amount of heads you have to design for. So we now will have a standard that can be used everywhere, and we've fudged it to a certain extent, because meanwhile all those standards I mentioned just in the slide before have had input from regulators who said, I want you to design for this number of sprinklers and with that amount of water application density. These regulators don't know each other or talk to each other, and to produce something that allows you to do it differently in Norway than in England, we've allowed people to specify some of those design criteria at a national level. This is a good standard. It builds on experience from lots of different countries. The Nordic standards have not thought about domestic systems. You hardly do any in Sweden in houses, whereas a lot are done here. And the UK's had been the strongest delegation. The component standard will follow later. As I explained, it follows the UL fire tests, and then the component tests for corrosion and so on are the same as for other sprinklers used in Europe. So, as requested, I've got a little question at the end. Will England announce new requirements for sprinklers in housing by 14th of June? Options I've suggested are A, yes, B, no, or C, no, but it should. Thank you.